Before we get into tonight's story, if you're new here, welcome to Velvet Shadows. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell us what city you're watching from. We have viewers from all over the world and we love seeing where you all are tuning in from now. Let's get into it. She didn't flinch. That was the part nobody understood afterward. When Serena walked into the Hargrove Foundation Gala, on the arm of Adelaide's husband, wearing a dress the same shade of ivory as a wedding gown, deliberately. Obviously, unmistakably deliberately, Adelaide Hargrove stood at the far end of the ballroom, held her champagne glass at exactly the same angle it had been at a moment before, and did not move a single muscle in her face. People were watching her. They always watched her at these events. She was the reason half the room had been funded. Her family's name was on the building, but in that moment, they weren't watching her the way they usually did. They were watching to see if she would break. She didn't. What the room did not know, what Serena certainly did not know, what Adelaide's husband Connor did not fully understand, even as he smiled that confident, careless smile of his, was that Adelaide had known about this for 11 days. She had known it was coming. She had not said a word, not to Connor, not to her father, not to anyone who might have intervened too soon. She had simply waited. And the thing about the Hargrove family was that they were very, very good at waiting. Adelaide Hargrove was 41 years old and had spent the last 14 years quietly making herself indispensable to two things: her husband's ambitions and her family's legacy. Not in a way anyone would call traditional. Not in a way Connor had ever fully appreciated. She ran the Hargrove family office, which sounds like a title, and it is, but it is also a machine. A machine that moved capital across 7 states, held equity positions in 43 companies, and had the kind of institutional relationships that do not appear on a website. She had married Connor Aldridge 8 years ago. He was brilliant and charismatic and exhausting, in the way that brilliant, charismatic men tend to be. He had built a medical technology company from nothing, Aldridge Medcor. And it was good work, genuinely good work, the kind of company that did meaningful things with cardiovascular diagnostics. Adelaide had believed in it. Her family had believed in it enough to provide the bridge financing that got it through its 3rd year, when the FDA approval timeline had stretched longer than anyone predicted and originals had gone cold. $14 million, not a loan. An equity stake, structured quietly, held through a subsidiary so that it would not appear to complicate Connor's fundraising narrative. Adelaide had suggested it that way. It protected him. He had agreed without fully reading what he was agreeing to. She remembered the night he signed the paperwork. He had kissed her on the forehead, called her brilliant, and then gone back to his phone. That was 8 years ago. Serena Voss was 29 years old and worked in public relations. She was beautiful in the particular way that cities produce: polished, strategic, aware of every angle. She had been Connor's account manager for his company's rebrand 18 months ago, and somewhere in the middle of brand positioning sessions and late dinners, she had apparently decided that Adelaide's life was something she wanted. What Serena had not accounted for, could not have accounted for, because Connor had never told her, possibly because he himself did not understand the full architecture of it, was that Adelaide's life was not something that could be stepped into simply by replacing Adelaide. The life was built on the Hargroves, and the Hargroves were not transferable. Adelaide had learned about the affair through the most ordinary means, a calendar notification that synced to the wrong device. Connor's phone and his laptop shared an out, and his laptop sat open in her home office one evening while she was reviewing quarterly reports. A dinner reservation appeared, a name, a restaurant she recognized, not because it was famous, but because Connor had taken her there on their 2nd anniversary and had told her it was their place. She had looked at the notification for a long time. Then she had closed the laptop and gone back to her quarterly reports. For 11 days, she did nothing that looked like anything. She attended a board meeting in Philadelphia. She had lunch with her mother. She took their dog, a 9-year-old retriever named Crosby, on his regular Thursday walk through the neighborhood. She slept next to Connor with the same quiet rhythm of a woman who has nothing on her mind, and in those 11 days she made 3 phone calls. not to lawyers, not yet to her father, to her father's chief of staff, and to the one person inside Connor's company who knew where every structural vulnerability lived. The Hargrove Foundation Gala happened every year in the second week of June. It was a fixture. It raised money for pediatric cardiac research, which had been Adelaide's grandmother's cause and was now Adelaide's, and it drew the kind of crowd that did not come to be seen so much as to demonstrate they belonged in a room where the other people also chose not to need to be seen. Subtle. Old. Real. Connor had attended every year of their marriage. He knew everyone. He was charming at these events. It was one of the things she had genuinely loved about him, the ease with which he moved through a room, the way he remembered names and asked questions that made people feel worth knowing. This year he had mentioned, offhandedly a week before, that he might bring a colleague because he had some business conversations he wanted to facilitate. Adelaide had said, "Of course." She had smiled. She had meant it as a door, and he had walked through it without looking down. So when the room shifted, that subtle, almost seismic shift that happens in a crowded space when something unexpected enters it, Adelaide did not turn around. She did not need to. She knew exactly who had walked in. She felt it in the quality of the silence around her. In the way the woman to her left, a foundation board member named Patricia, who had known Adelaide since she was 12 years old, went very still and then said, very quietly, "Adelaide." "I know," Adelaide said. "Do you want?" "I'm fine," Adelaide said. Let her settle in. Patricia looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone trying to read a map in a foreign language. "You planned this," Patricia said. Adelaide took a small sip of her champagne. "I didn't plan anything," she said. "I simply didn't prevent it." Serena had worn ivory because she was making a statement. That was the thing about Serena. She thought in statements. She thought in gestures. She had a publicist's brain, which means she understood optics intuitively, and she had decided that appearing at this event on Connor's arm, in this dress, in this room, was a statement that Adelaide Hargrove's time was over. What she had not understood, what nobody had told her, because nobody who knew the truth would have told her, was that the Hargrove Foundation Gala was not Connor's room. It was Adelaide's room. It had been Adelaide's room since she was 23 years old and had stood in this same ballroom beside her grandmother and learned how to receive people, how to make them feel welcome without making them feel like guests, how to own a space without announcing it. Serena walked through the crowd with the particular confidence of someone who believes she is disrupting something. She was not wrong. She was disrupting. What she had miscalculated was the direction of the disruption. She had assumed it would destabilize Adelaide. Instead, it was waking something up. Adelaide watched her from across the room and felt something she had not expected to feel, a kind of clarity. Not anger, not grief, something colder and more useful, the feeling of a decision that had already been made finally becoming real. Connor was at Serena's side, and the expression on his face, Adelaide catalogued it in the way she catalogued everything, was one she recognized as performance. He was performing ease. He was performing a man comfortable with his choices. But she knew the particular set of his jaw when he was managing anxiety, and he was managing quite a lot of it right now. Good, she thought. That meant some part of him understood what he had done. She had not cried. That was the thing people always seemed to expect. And she understood why. She was a woman who had been betrayed, and women were supposed to cry. Were supposed to fall apart. Were supposed to give that to the story. What she had done instead, in the 11 days between the calendar notification and tonight, was grieve privately and completely. She had done it alone, in the way she did most things. She had sat with it. She had let it move through her. She had acknowledged, in the part of herself, that was still the girl who had walked into this ballroom at 23 and believed in things, that this was a real loss, and it deserved real feeling. And then she had folded that feeling up and put it somewhere interior. And she had gotten to work, not because she was cold, because she understood the difference between feeling something and performing it for an audience. Serena wanted an audience. Connor, in some way, also wanted one. He wanted Adelaide to react, to make a scene, to give him the narrative of a wife who couldn't let go. It would have made him feel better about what he'd done, She refused to give him that. The dinner portion of the evening was just beginning when Adelaide saw her father enter the room. Edmund Hargrove was 67 years old and moved through spaces the way geological formations move, not quickly, but with a weight that rearranged what was around him. He was not tall. He did not wear his wealth in any way that announced itself. What he had was the absolute stillness of a man who had never in his adult life needed to prove anything to anyone in any room. He was not supposed to be here tonight. He had told Adelaide 2 weeks ago that he had a commitment in Washington. She had not asked him to change it. She had simply mentioned, in one of their 3 phone calls, the date and time of the gala. She had mentioned Connor's plan to bring a guest. She had said nothing else. He had apparently rearranged his schedule. Behind him, at a slight distance that indicated professional relationship rather than social proximity, was a woman Adelaide recognized, Miriam Cole, who served as general counsel for the Hargrove family office, and who also, as it happened, served as the registered agent for the subsidiary that held Aldridge Medcor Equity. Miriam was carrying a small portfolio. Patricia, still standing at Adelaide's elbow, made a very soft sound. Adelaide said nothing. Edmund moved through the room slowly, accepting greetings, pausing briefly for conversations. The way he always did. He was in no hurry. He was never in a hurry. He was a man who understood that time moves differently depending on how much of it you control. He reached his daughter. He kissed her on the cheek. "You look well," he said. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course." He looked out at the room with the calm survey of a man reviewing a property he owns. His gaze passed across Connor, across Serena. It didn't stop on either of them. He just noted them the way you note weather. "When?" Adelaide asked quietly. "Miriam has a meeting scheduled Monday morning," Edmund said. "Connor's office. His CFO will also be present." Adelaide nodded. "The pediatric wing announcement is at 9 o'clock, she said. "I know," her father said. "I'll stay for that." Connor noticed Edmund at approximately the same time that the first course was being placed on tables. Adelaide watched the moment it registered, watched Connor's hand tighten briefly around his water glass, watched him say something quiet to Serena, watched Serena lean in, and then look across the room for the first time with an expression that was not the triumphant assurance she'd worn walking in. Serena looked at Edmund Hargrove and did not immediately understand what she was looking at. But she understood something. You couldn't look at Edmund and not understand something. A colleague of Adelaide's on the foundation board, a woman named Constance, who had sat on 2 of the same medical advisory committees, leaned across the table and said to her husband in a voice that was not quite a whisper, "Did you see who came in?" Adelaide heard it. She didn't react. She picked up her fork. The thing nobody tells you about being the person in the room with actual power is that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to make speeches. You don't have to confront. You don't have to perform your outrage or your composure. You simply have to exist correctly and let the room do the rest. Connor understood numbers. He understood market positioning and FDA approval pathways and the biomechanics of cardiovascular devices. What he had never fully understood, because Adelaide had never made it a feature of their marriage, had let it recede into background infrastructure, was the actual mechanics of what the Hargrove family held. He knew they had invested. He did not know that the investment agreement, the one he'd signed 8 years ago in a rush of relief and gratitude and affection, had included a standard clause. Standard for the Hargrove family office, not standard for most investment agreements, that permitted the family to call a governance review of any company in their portfolio if a triggering event occurred. The definition of triggering event was broad. It included material changes to executive leadership structure. It included reputational risk to portfolio companies. It included, buried in subsection 4C, conduct by a principal officer that could reasonably be expected to expose the company to legal liability or public censure. Miriam Cole had drafted that language herself. She was very good at her job. Connor found Adelaide near the bar during the cocktail interlude before the dessert course. He had been working up to it for 40 minutes. She could tell by the way he kept almost moving in her direction and then redirecting. She waited. She had been waiting all evening. She was excellent at it. "Adelaide," he said. "Connor," she said. I think we should talk. I'm sure we should, she said. But not tonight. She's not. Started again. I didn't plan for tonight to Connor. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply final. Miriam is meeting with your CFO on Monday morning. I'd suggest you have your attorney present. The color left his face in a way that reminded her of a window shade being drawn. What? He stopped again. You should eat something, she said. The salmon is very good. Chef Beaumont did the menu this year and he's really outdone himself. She walked away from him. She did not look back. The pediatric wing announcement happened at 9:00, as scheduled. Edmund stood at the podium with Adelaide beside him, and he spoke for 4 minutes about the work her grandmother had begun, and the work Adelaide had continued, and the room gave them a standing ovation that had nothing to do with performance, and everything to do with the simple arithmetic of 2 generations of genuine commitment to something outside themselves. Adelaide smiled. She thanked the donors. She said the things she meant about why this work mattered. She was present for every second of it, which was the thing she was proudest of. That she had not let this evening be reduced to the drama that Connor had introduced into it. That the thing that would be remembered about this night was a gift to pediatric cardiac research, not a scene. Serena had gone quiet by the dessert course. She had spent most of the second half of the evening with the particular expression of someone recalculating, as she had arrived believing she was entering Connor's world. She was only now beginning to understand that she had entered Adelaide's, and that Adelaide had let her walk in. That was the difference. Serena had thought the gala was a setting. It was, in fact, a demonstration. On Monday morning, Miriam Cole arrived at Connor's office at 9 a.m. with 2 associates and the investment agreement. Connor's attorney was present, as Adelaide had suggested. His CFO was present, as Miriam had requested. The meeting lasted 2 hours. The Hargrove family office exercised their governance review clause. This was not a hostile action. Miriam explained this carefully, professionally, without drama. It was simply a clause being triggered. The outcome of that review would depend on various factors. During the review period, certain financial structures would be adjusted. Certain relationships with Hargrove-affiliated institutions, banks, funds, partners, would enter a state of temporary suspendment pending the review's conclusion. This was explained in the same tone one might use to describe a change in office parking procedures. Connor called Adelaide that afternoon. She let it go to voicemail. He called again that evening. She listened to the message. His voice had lost the performed ease entirely. What was left was something she recognized from 8 years ago, the version of him that was genuinely frightened and didn't know how to be. It almost moved her. Almost. She set the phone down. She poured herself a glass of water. She took Crosby out for his evening walk, the one he loved most. Through the neighborhood, where the old oak trees met overhead and made a kind of tunnel that smelled like summer and something that couldn't quite be named, and she walked the whole length of it twice. And she thought about her grandmother, who had loved this street too, who had understood that the point of building something lasting was not to use it as a weapon, but to make sure that the people who thought they could walk through it unscathed would one day discover, too late, the weight of what they'd dismissed. She did not feel victorious. She felt clear. There is a difference. People ask, sometimes, why a woman in Adisha would stay quiet for 11 days instead of confronting the situation immediately. Why she would let Connor bring Serena into that room. Why she would give him enough rope, as the expression goes. The answer is that Adelaide had not been quiet. She had been working. The room, the evening, the announcement. None of that was a trap. She hadn't arranged it to humiliate anyone. She had simply done what she was going to do regardless, shown up to her family's foundation event, stood beside her father, made a meaningful announcement about pediatric cardiac research. What she had also done was choose not to remove the variables Connor had introduced. She had let the room see everything clearly, without interference, without performance, without the kind of scene that would have made her look small and him look martyred. She had let the room understand on its own terms what it was looking at. And rooms full of people who have known a family for 40 years are very good at understanding, on their own terms, exactly what they are looking at. The divorce was filed 6 weeks later. It was handled by a firm Adelaide had selected 2 years prior, not for any particular reason at the time, just because she believed in preparation. The terms were what they were. Property, assets, the equity arrangements that had already been addressed through the governance process. Connor did not fight it. Maybe because he understood, finally, what he had actually been standing inside for 8 years. Not just a marriage. Not just a woman. An entire architecture of relationships and trust, and slow-built institutional credibility that had held him up in ways he had attributed entirely to himself. Or maybe he was just tired. Adelaide suspected both were true. Serena's name appeared in a trade publication 6 months later, listed as the new director of communications for a startup in Austin. Adelaide saw the item and felt nothing in particular about it. Serena had been in the end less the cause of anything than the occasion for it. The trouble between her and Connor had not begun with Serena. It had begun long before, in 100 smaller moments of erasure. His, not hers. She had known that. She had let herself not know it for a long time, the way you let yourself not see something that will require too much to address. The night of the gala had simply been the night. She stopped, pretending she didn't see it. The pediatric wing opened 8 months after the gala. Adelaide stood at the ribbon cutting in the same quiet way she stood at everything, present, direct, without spectacle. Her father stood beside her. Crosby, who was technically not supposed to be at a hospital ribbon cutting, but who Edmund had arranged a special dispensation for, because her grandmother had loved that dog's predecessor and the tradition mattered, sat at her feet and looked at the building with the ancient, unconcerned satisfaction of a very old dog in the presence of people he trusts. A journalist asked Adelaide if the wing's naming was sentimental for her. She thought about the question for a moment. My grandmother used to say that the only things worth building are the ones that will still be doing something useful long after you stop thinking about them, she said. That's not sentiment. That's just good engineering. The journalist wrote it down. The wing was doing its work before Adelaide had driven home. And the gala, and Connor, and Serena, and the ivory dress, and all of it had already become the kind of story that a room full of people tells quietly, at dinners, for years, not as a cautionary tale exactly, not as a triumph exactly, but as a reminder that some things look like power from the outside that are not power, and some things look like stillness that are not stillness at all. The room understood. It always had.